unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
You had it nearly right the first time around.
As I was struggling with this, I was thinking, well, I think this is an intelligence test, and I think I'm failing. Thank goodness Zen has no particular goal or limited expression. So let's start by sitting for a few minutes. And if you could sit in a way, if you're sitting in a chair, if you could sit balanced on your sit bones, like if you can move your back away from the back of the chair. And then if you can just notice whatever is happening in your body and resist the impulse to improve it. And then bring full awareness, or as full awareness as you can, to releasing on the exhale. And for a couple of breaths, just allow yourself to let go. Maybe more in a physical way than intellectually or emotionally. And as you breathe in, can you notice how the body can soften and open as you breathe in? Taking in the arising moment, taking in all that's present in this arising moment. Okay, thank you. This is the first time I've given a talk in this impressive room. I was standing over there and marveling at this wonderful stained glass window. And then sitting here, I see there's a whole series of them. that way in which religion, spirituality is drawn to express itself through beauty. Yeah. Maybe there's a wisdom in that, a skillfulness in that awakening is inviting us to be who we are, to let the world we're in be what it is, beautiful and terrible. Maybe we could use those same adjectives for ourselves, beautiful and terrible. I am going to talk about, among other things, about a quote from Dogen Zenji, the founder of this kind of Zen. In one of his seminal works, he said, having realization about delusion is Buddha being. Having delusions about Buddha is karmic being. How do we enable the first part, having realization about delusion, rather than perpetuating having delusions about Buddha? I've had, over the last several months, does this seem echoey to you, or does it just me? It's a little echoey? Yeah. Let me move this away a little bit and see, does that help? Several months ago, I was asked to give a talk, an online talk, for the New York Zen Center on Buddha nature. And then soon thereafter, I received the latest edition of Buddha Dharma, a quarterly magazine. And the whole magazine, that whole magazine was dedicated to Buddha nature. And then I discovered that Tanto and Kim and Dan, who I don't see here right now, we're going to lead a salon on Buddha nature. So, as I was contemplating all those coincidences, I started to think, well, should I talk about Buddha nature? And here's what my mind, my devious mind, came up with. Can I talk about Buddha nature without mentioning it? So that's the last time I'll mention it. Along with two other teachers, Gil Fronsdal and Jennifer Block, I lead a Buddhist chaplaincy course that goes for a year, actually 11 months. But somewhere in that course, usually about the halfway mark, and then we meet for a full day. Nice to see you, Ravi. We meet for a full day once a month. And about the middle of the course, we do what's called case studies. And we ask the chaplains to be, or the chaplains in training, or the internal chaplains, call them as you will. We ask them to bring to the group their moments of great failure as a chaplain. You know. As I was thinking about this, and this in a way has that particularity of our course has inspired me in what to say this morning. And I'll explain why, sort of. Certain questions might arise, they arose in my mind. What are we hoping for in asking the trainee chaplains to present their great failures? Do we want a reason to rebuke them and criticize them? Do we want to feel our own superiority since we keep our own failures hidden? Or is there something in that process that helps the person discover what it is to be a chaplain? Or more particularly, there's a phrase we use. We talk about skillful use of the self. And implicit in that process is that the so-called failures can be a wonderful teaching. And that's what brought to mind this quote from Dogen Zenji. Having realization about delusion is Buddha being. Being able to see what's going on for us and how it's impacting us and what gives it, what helps it to arise. And what do we learn from it? So this is what we do collectively with the trainee chaplains. And they, as part of the course, they take an internship in a hospital, in a prison, working with the homeless, things like that. And what we're asking them to look at is moments when the environment they were being a chaplain. A chaplain has this exalted vow: be of service to others. Which I think of as very close to the Bodhisattva vow: be of service to others. And then the wonderful and heroic thing a chaplain does is be of service to others in their time of need, in their time of distress. And then sometimes that very environment that's bringing stress or some oppression to the person the chaplain is being of service to, it brings distress to the chaplain. And then we ask them if they would, and we do this on a volunteer basis. We say, is there someone who would like to present a moment in their chaplaincy that they find in their own being a sort of lacking in their response? And then we would ask them to describe the situation, the particulars of it. the particulars of the interaction. And then we'd ask them to describe what was the impact of that, of those particulars. What was their response to them? And, I remember once doing a similar process in hospice training. And then someone said, in the old Laguna Honda, we had 30 beds to a ward. It was old-fashioned, and now there's little pods where there may be 2 or even 3 beds in the pod. But before, there were 30 beds in the ward. And one of the volunteers came in, and in that moment, he was totally overwhelmed by the notion that he needed to be of service to these people. And he thought, well, before I start, I'll meditate. And so he sat down and meditated for a while, and he was still overwhelmed. And then he thought, I'll just walk down the ward. And I won't expect myself to talk to anybody, but I'll just walk down, turn around at the end, and walk back. And so he walked down the ward, turned around, and started to walk back. And someone shouted from their bed, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And so he walked swiftly down the ward and straight out the door. And then later, he talked about his moment of great failure. Or to put it in a kinder way, he talked about his moment of humanness, his moment of imperfection, his moment of having limited capacity. And so in doing this with the trainee chaplains, this is what the intention is, you know. Can you discover that along with your heroic vow to be of service to others, that you bring a humanness, you bring an imperfection, you bring a limitation to your capacities. And then we process it as a group, as the person presents the incident. And as we do, we invite the other trainee chaplains to ask questions. When did you first notice that your body and your mind were tightening? When did you first notice that you were pulling back from engaging? And how was it when you did that? Did it stir up any kinds of emotions for you? And this is the first part of having a realization about delusion. Or maybe we could just say having realization about the limitations of being a human that we call me. And so in the safety hopefully, in the safety and trust and non-judgmental nature of the chaplaincy course. We can just hold that. We can hold the person. We can offer our empathy, offer each other and ourselves a benevolence, an acceptance. Oh, this is who we are. And I would suggest to you that each of us cares enough about this life to offer ourselves and each other benevolence. And that as we do that, it evokes a certain kind of alchemy. You know? I remember a long time ago, when I was a monk in Thailand, the teacher said to me, encourage yourself by encouraging others. And maybe the chaplaincy course is discover your benevolence by being benevolent to others, and then discover that you could benefit from the same benevolence. So even in that little meditation I was offering at the start, to offer a skillfulness about unwinding the tension, the agitation, either blatant or subtle, of our being. Yeah. And then to delve a little deeper into the chaplaincy course. So we don't ask this when they walk in the door for the first meeting. We ask it more when they've come to know who else is in the room. They've come to befriend them. They've come to trust them, and have in that circle of trust and benevolence to trust themselves, to be vulnerable. And I'd suggest to you that this is the challenge for us in zazen. Can we create an inner environment where there is benevolence and we can trust how we're relating to ourselves? And part of that discovery is discovering quite a simple thing about practice. If your practice is based on self-criticism or criticism of others, like if you turn it into a competition. I must confess that when I was at Tassajara a long time ago, we had a practice of during sessions, intensive meditation, where we would stay up late meditating. And it became a kind of competition, you know. Like, who can stay up the latest? What prompts us to take something that's offering us compassion and benevolence and turn it into a competition? What prompts us when we're enacting our benevolence to shrink back, to somehow close down, disconnect. And how do we do that in our own sitting? We're engaging internally the same process. How do we do that? And so for the first 6 months of the chaplaincy course, we're providing didactic information. We're providing details. Here are good practices to develop as a chaplain. Here's some attitudes you can bring to it. I remember hearing a seasoned chaplain say, the chaplain is one of the few people that the person in the bed can order to leave. You can't order the nurse to leave, you can't order the doctor to leave, you can't even order the orderly, because they're just cleaning up what needs to be cleaned up. But the chaplain, you can ask them to leave. And to know that our benevolence isn't based on our authority, either interpersonally or intrapersonally. Our benevolence is more based on a humility that we're all imperfect. And that imperfection is asking for kindness, is asking for compassion. And so for the 6 months, we say that to the training chaplains in as many ways as we can think of. Bring as many Buddhist teachings as illustrate that as we think are appropriate. So how can each one of us explore the workings of the self? And I would suggest to you, one of the ways we can do that is we can notice in our lives significant moments. Significant moments when we feel a turmoil in our being. And interestingly, we can also notice and acknowledge the moments when something feels opening, something feels like it's flowing, something feels expansive. That both the positive, in the realm of practice, both the positive and the negative have something to teach us. The positive experience gives us a glimpse of appreciation, the energy of enjoying being in that moment. Whether it's a moment of solitude or a moment of intimacy with another person. And then also, we can, maybe it's far-fetched to say we can enjoy the moments of our difficulty. However, I would say, from my own experience, that at a certain point, the moments of difficulty can be intriguing. Oh, look at me struggling with this. You know, what's going on? Yeah. But I would say to you, it's a delicate process. Don't try to force it on yourself, but more can you come at it with a tender heart? Yeah. Can you come at it with a simple phrase of, oh, I'm struggling with this. This is a difficult moment. This is a difficult interaction. This is a difficult memory for me. And the more we can start to learn what is it to navigate, what is it to open to what we're inclined to turn away from, inclined to pull back from. The more we can do that, the more manageable our life, the person that we are, the personality, the circumstances, the more they take on a disposition of possibility. Yeah. To go back to that hospice meeting where someone told the group, he told the group what exactly happened. And then we had a wonderful meeting. It seemed like everyone felt permission to talk about their inadequacies. And that they were being held more as teachings, almost amusing teachings, rather than reasons for shame and blame. How can we cultivate that within ourselves? You know, I think the second part of this quote from the Genjokoan, delusions about Buddha being, is karmic being. You know, that impulse that practice is going to fix me, practice is going to perfect me. Somehow, all the ways I suffer are going to be alleviated through the realm of practice, the engagement of practice. But rather to think, as I study this, as I explore this, as I learn what it is to stay present for my own difficulties, what it is to open to my difficult emotions, what is it to see how often when we feel threatened, we shrink back into a deep self-concern. When all of these can become something to note, something to acknowledge, something to open to experiencing. And what supports it? You know, like a few moments ago I was saying, part of the challenge of zazen is for us, can we create within our own being, within our meditation, can we create a welcoming, benevolent, heroic being? It's a tall order. You know? And that's why it's helpful to look at the moments it's happening for you. To see how the mind relaxes, to feel how the mind can relax. You know, to feel how the body can relax. Like sometimes we can see when we're with a certain kind of person or persons, we feel kind of stilted or uncomfortable. And then if we're someone we consider a dear friend, how conversation just flows. It's as if you could sit there and talk forever. You know, often our usual notion is something in me needs to be better, you know, in all sorts of ways, you know. Maybe I need to be less impatient. Maybe I need to be less critical of myself or someone else. Maybe I need to have a better coping mechanism for my distress. Dogen is saying, like Kaz Tanahashi's translation, he's saying, those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. And then I translated it as, delusions about Buddha being is karmic being. My reason for doing that was Kaz's translation, Kaz Tanahashi's translation, seems a little like those who are greatly deluded. I think of each one of us as a kind of mysterious mix that we're prompted to be of service to others, and at the same time, we're prompted to be quite selfish. We're prompted to have life just the way we want it, and at the same time, we yearn for greater being. Within us, we have these almost contradictory impulses. Yeah. And can they be our teacher? You know, if we think about it in a practical way, such states of being are common occurrence. You know, you can go on an intensive meditation where you're meditating most of the day and have moments where your own usual agitations have quieted down. And it's my own experience and coaching others, the experience of coaching others, that in those moments, often we think, okay, now I'm getting it right. This is how it ought to be. I think that has a great teaching within it. But the teaching within it is that it's possible, you know. And then in exploring our more usual moments, our more usual way of being, we can start to unpack them and discover that right in the midst of those so-called entrenched karmic being, we can have some of the space and freedom and ease that we had. Did we just lose it? It's back? No? Keep talking? Okay. Yeah, it's back. Within the moments of conditioned being, we can have moments of spaciousness. And we can see that moments of spaciousness are not fully dependent upon special circumstances within our being or in our interbeing. Recently at Tassajara in the spring, we had a great tragedy. One of the students was hiking and she fell and died. And her mother and her father came to Tassajara. But her mother in particular was very moved by the outpouring of grief and gratitude for who her daughter was. And she said to me, "This is a horrible tragedy to lose my daughter. And in this environment, there's something beautiful." In this very life we're living, in this very person we are, there's something beautiful. There's a capacity to open. There's a movement to open. And there's a moment to enact, to renew the deep conditioning of our being. And what Dogen's pointing out, he's pointing out that deep conditioning of our being can be related to as a profound teaching, you know. When we deeply connect to something in ourselves, we can have empathy for how that appears with others. When we see the distress in our own being or in others, we can have a deep compassion for the human condition. We can see within ourselves the particulars. Oh, what's the character? What's the particularity of my own vulnerability? How does that arise for me? Well, and we can see the layers in our own being. You know? I woke up this morning thinking about when I was about 11 or 12 and I'd started a new school, and somehow or other I was caught up in the notion. Others were sort of created a situation where I needed to fight with the school bully, as I thought of him. And I remember before it started, I was thinking, how did this happen? And this morning, and then I fought the school bully and actually managed to survive that. But then the next day, he and his friend decided to beat me up. And when I went home bruised, my mother said, "What happened?" And I told her like I walked into a door or something. But when I woke up thinking about that, I thought, how amazing that there felt something unfinished about something that happened so long ago. there's layers to our being, you know. And those layers are layers of teaching, you know. Sometimes it's a loosening of some embitteredness within us. Sometimes it's a loosening of some fearfulness, some kind of prejudice, or impulsive reactiveness. As we engage the stuff we're made of, a layer of trusting comes up. This life, this person that I am, it is possible to flourish. This is the great gift of practice. Thank you.
I invite everybody to stand up and stretch.
Sure. You're welcome to, we'll have a Q&A, but before we do that, you're welcome to stand up and stretch for a few moments.
We have
Okay.
time for a few questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning.
Oh, yes.
Morning.
Good morning.
How do we prevent increasing benevolence being just part of this, becoming yet another karmic effort?
We start with the question that you just asked and own it, you know, and then ask it in a way that is inviting inquiry. You know, how would that be for this one? You know, what would support me? What would inspire me? What would encourage me to explore that? You know, when does that arise for me? You know, the contraction and rather than the expansion. You know. I think in a way we can support each other. We can even guide each other. But then there's some part of that intimate working that is deeply personal as to what works. And that's part of our individual exploration. What works in that regard? Thank you.
Hello, this question comes from online, from Griffin. I have a delusion that letting go, surrendering, will make me feel better, liberated. Can you speak to this?
Well, maybe the glib response is check it out and see if it works. And a more studied response would be, can we, any one of us, can the person who's asking the question, discover what that statement means for them? And then can they see how it might be the subject of exploration? You know, even in early Buddhism, you know, investigation was considered to be a very significant practice of the Buddha way. And certainly in the Zen school, you know, really the whole notion of koan is this deep investigation of what facilitates awakening and what thwarts awakening. And the notion, as we pay attention, we can discover all the different kinds of notions. You know, sometimes we're moved by, as I said, when we were sitting up late, by competition. Sometimes we're moved by a sense of inadequacy. Sometimes all sorts of things we're moved by. And for each of us to explore. And then the delicate work is to trust our own being, but the exploration itself will help cultivate the trust. How long does it take? You know, it's hard to know. You know, when I read Dogen's fascicles and read his life story and how he dedicated himself to practice, and then every now and then in his stories, there's a vitriolic condemnation of some other way of thinking about practice. And I thought, whenever I read that, I think, maybe he still had some work to do. I remember asking a Dogen scholar, and I said, was that just theater? Did he just say that because he wanted to see if the monks were still awake and paying attention? And the Dogen scholar said, no, my notion is he actually had vitriolic condemnations of others. Yeah. But even that, it can be studied, you know. But, you know, our bodhisattva vow, delusions are inexhaustible. I vowed to practice with them. Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you, Paul. This may be a little long-winded, but I'm going to try to get to the point. I'm thinking about like what public shame does in our society as not society, but like as humans in kind of like enforcing morality. And I think there are a couple of examples that I'm thinking coming up kind of these days is I was reading about this Olympian Dutch volleyball player who has been getting booed pretty heavily, like at every match. And it
Has been getting what?
booed by the
Oh, booed. Yeah.
by the attendants,
Yeah.
attendees, and there is a good reason, but so this man was convicted in a pretty distressing circumstances of like raping a child when he was 19. And I was thinking to myself, like, who is this man now, 20-something years later? And who are we, like all of us, that feel like we need to make a statement and kind of like, what have we done in our lives? That's one example. And I'll get to the second one super quick. And what I'm thinking essentially is like, where's the line in how we treat shame or public, let's say, being witness to something? And the other example that I'm thinking is last week or maybe two, Netanyahu was giving a speech at the Congress, right? And lots of people didn't attend as a show of protest. But one person did show up, one representative who was holding a sign, genocidal war criminal, like the whole time. So what I'm thinking is, in between these two examples, that like both of them are using public shame to make a statement about something has been done wrong. And I'm having a dissonance about which one of them, how do we approach it in a way that we both do acknowledge harm and something very immoral, while also holding that complexity of the person, the layers of that person, having compassion for them.
You know, I think your last statement, in a way, would state the challenge for us. You know, how do we acknowledge that when this person was 19, they did this horrendous thing? But who is this person now? You know, and then with Netanyahu, my own notion is, like Israel and the politics and who decides what actions are going to happen, are probably quite complex, you know? And maybe it's naive to think, well, I know what's happening. But in addition to that, it does seem to be like it's generating a lot of suffering, a lot of distress, a lot of death. And personally, I think that is totally inappropriate. You know, that we should learn to live together, and that no one should die because of someone else's notion of nationality or ethnicity or whatever. I think we can thoroughly disagree with such accents. We can protest them. We can express our disagreement. And we don't have to think, in my way of thinking about it, is the true way. We can just think, these actions, these consequences are worthy of challenge, of protest. And what's happening behind the scenes, maybe we'll never know. I think the action we can thoroughly disagree with in both cases that you mentioned. And I think we need to be careful before we presume we know all the facts and want to have an authoritative condemnation of either that volleyball player or the Israeli military or Netanyahu or the American government for supplying arms. I mean, I think all of those things we can disagree with and protest, but I think we need to be careful about adopting the authority of an absolute position. I think it helps us. I came from a country that was very divided, and the consequence was 30 years of killing on both sides. And it was only when the notion of compromise, the notion of listening to the other, of being willing to hear something other than the opinions that they were being held in an absolute way. It was only then something emerged, a new possibility emerged. In my own notion is, as I just said, that killing anyone, even one person, is a violation that should be protested. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
What happens now? May our intention equally extend through every being.